When the Supreme Court judges basically just agreed with the EACC that, if you can't explain it,
Can't prove it,
you lose it. Now, let's speak to an assistant director at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission who was involved very much in this case from the very beginning. Philip Kagucia, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for speaking to us this morning and welcome to the Situation Room.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Philip, first of all, a good win at the Supreme Court. Just give us the context of this briefly.
Yeah, it's a great win. The context of this case is simply a public officer, in this case Mr. Amuti, who was a finance manager at the National Water Corporation and Pipeline Corporation. And in 10 months, he made cumulative deposits in excess of 140 million. Cumulative withdrawals in excess of 85 million. And according to the investigators, there was a net acquisition of assets of about 55 million. That's the difference between the 140 and the 85. So basically, that's what we initially were going after. Yes.
And when you took the case to court, initially Justice Kalpana Rawal raised issues with the sections of the law that you were quoting.
Yes, Section 55, that's right.
Yeah. And then you took the case now to appeal.
Yes.
And this is where the Court of Appeal agreed with you.
Yes, because the issue that was introduced by Lady Justice Rawal, who was later our Deputy Chief Justice, was that she felt that when the burden of proof shifts to the defendant, the standard appears to be higher than that for EACC. And it appeared as if the law, the way it was enacted, may be a little unfair on Amuti. And she was of the opinion that perhaps Parliament should look at it again.
Right.
Of course, we disagreed and we went to the Court of Appeal. And the Justice of Appeal said, you know what, it's normal for the burden of proof to shift. Especially because only Amuti would have the information about how he acquired those assets. Yes, and that's why it was sent back to the High Court to be heard afresh. Yes.
Okay. This is clear that this was a landmark win, Philip, because over time there has been so much in terms of the prosecution, in terms of the return of monies that could not be proved. And looking at this case and the length of time that it took, what does this essentially mean going forward now for cases that the EACC may have had their eye on for a while, or for cases that might crop up in the future? What exactly does this mean in terms of then what the EACC would be able to do?
All right. Well, what I would like perhaps to remind everyone is that the mandate of the EACC is both to prevent and combat corruption. When you take away the money, the only reason people steal is they steal to make money.
Right.
When you take away this money, it is a disincentive. Because these guys, what they do is they do this analysis of the risk versus the reward. So I figure that, okay, what are the chances of being caught? But if I've stolen, say, $1 million, 100 million, I can live with that risk. Also, with regard to the question you mentioned, the issue of prosecution. Again, somebody could go to court, and because the threshold for evidence is very high, they could actually get acquitted. And he'd still have the 100 billion stashed away somewhere.
Right.
Worst case scenario, even if he went to jail, he could sit there for 2-3 years and have his 100 billion sitting somewhere waiting
for him to come out.
Exactly. But now when we go in and take away the money, the incentive for these people to steal, a lot of people will think twice before they engage in corruption.
Right.
But the other side of it is this. We are putting back the money to where it is supposed to be. We need this money for our own services. We need to build schools, build roads, equip hospitals. So we're bringing the money back. So that is the import of this kind of decision.
So basically, when you're required now to be the one, what I'm hearing now is EACC comes to me, I'm a public officer, and
Yes.
and you say, Eric, you hold 100 million shillings in cash and assets, and we'd like you to
Yes.
prove how you acquired this.
Yes.
So you're basically telling me that it's for me to prove how I acquired this wealth, and if I cannot, if I stammer just a little bit, you take it.
In fact, the process is a little bit more elaborate. We even write to you before,
Okay.
and we say we have traced everything that you have, and we believe it is disproportionate to your known legitimate sources.
Mhm.
And that's very key to remember. The sources have to be known, like your salary, Eric,
Mhm.
and they have to be legitimate. So you can't tell me you're selling crack cocaine,
Yep.
and that's how you made the money.
Right. as a reason.
I run a
Okay.
logistics company.
Okay, and it's all, and by the way, many Kenyans have many assets. Some people inherit.
Yep.
We even have the unusual cases of sport pesa.
Yep.
Yeah.
A guy will go into a casino, make a few million. It happens. So it should not be difficult for somebody to explain legitimate income.
Okay.
And it's only after that, when you look at your explanation and it is not satisfactory, that is when we start talking about going to court.
Okay.
Yes.
Wealth declaration has been an issue for many individuals over time. When we talk about lifestyle audits and things like this in the country, would this ruling then impact on individuals for whom have not previously then been able to declare their wealth?
Okay. The first thing I'd like to mention, I don't know if you're all aware, there is a lifestyle audit bill that is being looked at right now.
Yes.
And we are hoping that one goes through because it will make our job much easier.
How different is it from what we currently have?
Right now, the only thing we have is the declaration of income, assets, and liabilities,
Yep.
which is you, Eric Latif, declaring to me what you own.
Yep.
But I do not always have the opportunity to come and verify.
Okay.
And perhaps if we had done that before, we would even be able to narrow down the sort of people who appear to have been engaged in corruption.
Mm-hmm.
So now, with the wealth declaration, as Ndu asked, there is no criminal issue arising from failing to declare. And that's perhaps one of the things which we should also introduce.
Okay.
Why is a public officer not declaring every 2 years?
Right.
But in terms of this case, this landmark ruling, if you declare you only made 1 million in 2020, and I find out that you have 100 million in the same time, how are you going to explain the difference?
Right. And with the new bill that's in Parliament, how is it going to change the playing field now?
Well, one of the things we are hoping to be is a bit more proactive. As it is, this regime for wealth declaration is not expressly under the mandate of the EACC.
Okay.
But as you've noticed, the government is working with a multi-agency approach.
Yeah.
So that is where we are hoping to go. We're hoping to be able to work together, be a bit more proactive, be able to say, okay, these are the people who have given us their declarations. Are we able to audit? Because you will never hear anybody declaring more than they have. You get what I mean?
Right.
Yes. In the majority of cases, people will be under-declaring.
People under-declare.
And especially if you're stashing 4 million in your house like a muti, you're not likely to say you have 4 million under the mattress.
Of course not.
Yes, and that's the importance because in this case, that was one of the issues.
Okay. What are the chances, I don't know whether to call it chances or risk, of this new, you prove it or you lose it, affecting the smaller fish, quote unquote, more than the big fish? Where the bigger, because if you look at it in any corporation, association, or in any organization, you'll find that the people down here who do the dirty work are likely to be the ones that will be nabbed. Then the ones above who benefit from these activities go scot-free. So what are the chances that this will apply equally across board, as opposed to, the smaller fish carrying the yoke for everyone else?
Well, perhaps I can start by saying that there is no big fish or small fish. In the end, it is all corruption. And if you look at a case like Amuti, he wasn't a small fish. He was a finance controller.
Yeah.
And as you've seen from the judgment, the court said he needs to forfeit 41 million. Which small fish in Kenya has 41 million worth of unexplained assets? And I would just like to point out the kind of cases we've done recently are not involving small people. There's one in Mombasa, the former MD Kenya Ports Authority, and that was 74 million. Again, there is no small fish there.
Right.
Yeah.
We have one which has just left the High Court and gone to the Court of Appeal, involving the Nairobi City County Finance Manager.
Yeah.
That's 317 million. There's no small fish there.
Right.
The land commission.
So we had the lady who is the valuer for the National Lands Commission. We found $170,000 in her house.
Yep.
And an additional 1 million. That's not a small fish. And we had an accountant from the Ministry of Interior, and the judgment was for 112 million.
There was a junior officer at NHIF.
Yes, this is the guy who was taking a chopper to work.
Yes.
Allegedly.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're the ones who are running with that matter, but I am aware of it. Yes, it's part of the multi-agency task force.
But I guess what the question that Mercy is asking is, you find in many cases you'll go for the procurement officer, an account manager, but this person most likely was acting in cahoots with others.
Up to the board level sometimes.
Up to board level. And
Yes,
once
but
you
as
come
you've heard
for
from-
this person, then you leave out the other people who are still running in the board. So you've just removed one of their conduits. They just recruit a new conduit.
As you've heard, the people I've mentioned, there hasn't been a procurement officer yet.
Yeah.
It's mostly accountants, and you may have a point that they're working in cahoots with others. And this is the point of investigations. We have a department that does what is called asset tracing.
Okay.
And they will just follow the money, follow the assets, and identify who else may have been a beneficiary. But in most cases, if you find this person, and the reason maybe it is more conspicuous, is because these are the money people.
Right, these are the moneyed people. Speaking of them being the moneyed people, Philip, then what happens to these monies? Because we're probably going to see, I mean, if we can hang on to probability, we're probably going to see a lot more if it's going to be collected from these individuals. What will then be done with this money that's forfeited by these individuals now in the near future?
All right. What the law provides for is for the money to go back to the PS Treasury. That's in the Anti-Corruption Economic Crimes Act. I am aware there's another bill which is to set up an asset recovery fund. And perhaps it is to address this concern. This money already comes from government, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then it is stolen by corrupt officials. Then we take it back to the same government. So perhaps one of the considerations is, why don't we have it in an asset recovery fund?
Yeah.
And the fund will have a manager, and this money will be applied to things which people have discussed and agreed upon. Yeah, so that is something which is in the pipeline. There's an asset recovery fund bill.
Okay.
Yes, and also going forward and perhaps this is in line with what the CEO of EACC, Mr. Twalib, was talking about.
Yes.
This is an opportunity for people to return these assets. The same way EACC is returning to the state, anybody who feels that they might get into trouble because of possessing assets which may have been acquired corruptly, this is the time they can come and say, you know what, maybe I did something wrong, and I would like, as a show of good faith, to start by returning these assets.
And is this without fear of prosecution, Philip?
That is part of the negotiation.
Uh-huh.
It does not mean that this person will be absolved. Let me give you an example. If somebody is a habitual thief, and they have been stealing from one institution to the next institution to the next institution, that is not likely the kind of person who will negotiate to recover the assets without prosecution. And I would just like to advise our listeners, the recovery must happen. Whether they are prosecuted or not, the recovery will happen. So all we are saying is, don't waste our time 2 years in court. Give us the money first.
Right.
I think
Then we'll listen to what you have to say.
you need to expound on that. When you say the recovery must happen irrespective of prosecution, what do you mean? That you'll take me to court
What I
for
mean is,
corruption,
yes.
but you'll have taken the money first?
Exactly. In many cases, for example, Amuti was never charged.
Right.
And this is one of the unique features of unexplained assets. Forfeiture of unexplained assets is not dependent on prosecution. So Amuti has not been found guilty of corruption. He has been found to be in possession of assets way beyond his known legitimate sources.
Right.
And because he couldn't explain, and it is believed it was acquired through corruption, he has to forfeit.
But
so
you-
that is the beauty of forfeiture.
But you still go to court. I mean, you cannot make that decision unilaterally. As EACC sit back and decide, Amuti, we want your money. You must get...
No. Yes. Thank you for that, Eric. It is the court which is determining.
Okay.
Yes. And a lot of work goes into it before it reaches court.
So here there are two things. Let me get it straight. There are two things here. That there is one that we have been able to prove that you cannot explain how you found your wealth or you acquired your wealth. One, and two,
Exactly.
which is independent, is whether you're guilty of corruption or not is altogether. These are two different things at the same time.
Exactly. And there's a reason why it was designed that way. We are signatories to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption.
Yes.
And corruption by nature is very complex. And in some cases, it involves, for example, people who are fugitives. So Eric has disappeared with 100 million and is gone somewhere we can't get him, like Ecuador. But the assets are here. I, as the lawyer for EACC, should be able to go to court and say, Eric did 1, 2, 3
Right.
and acquired these assets, and they need to come back to the state. The other example is perhaps the corrupt person is deceased. Again, we should be able to go for the assets, even if that person is not reachable.
Okay.
So the unexplained assets regime is designed to help us recover the assets, even if we cannot ultimately prove what he did.
Okay.
This is very similar to, the proceeds of crime and anti-money laundering. Yes, so for money laundering, you don't need to prove the predicate offense.
Okay.
We just need to prove that this money is a proceed of a crime. In EACC's case, it's a proceeds of corruption.
Sounds to me,
Stay on the line,
last question,
Philip.
yeah.
Then we continue with this conversation. We just want to take a look at traffic shortly. And then we come back and continue this conversation. And we'll open up the phone lines for anybody who's got a question for the EACC to also call in and ask. Maybe somebody may even want to forfeit some of their ill-acquired
Absolutely.
wealth.
On air.
Right here on
no
air.
less.
Philip Kagucia is the Assistant Director for EACC. He's basically EACC's lawyer. He's talking about a landmark ruling that they've gotten from the Supreme Court and how now that they can basically come back and take any wealth from you. I'm not going to go beyond that because there are some technical words that Philip is using that must be used, I believe, in this. There's a lot that's happening. There's a lot that's been happening with the EACC and the fight against corruption that, sometimes just like Colonel Cyrus Agono was saying, let's highlight the positives. These are some of those positives that we're talking about. But also when there are negatives, will hit you hard. If you've got any questions or comments to the EACC, 0719-012-600. That's 0719-012-600. Also join the conversation on our social media handles, SpiceFMKE on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, where we're live streaming.
Philip, a question for you as we go on. Just from if you, with people most times making a plan in terms of what needs to come in, if you cast your eyes forward, can you see that there's a plethora of cases through which a lot of public funds then could return to the Treasury because of this ruling now?
Absolutely, and myself and my colleagues have a number of cases which are being litigated. Of course, you're aware if it's before the courts, we may not discuss them, but this is what is happening. The only thing that happened in the Amuti case is that it was so dramatic, started out in 2008, and was only conclusively determined in 2017 before it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court passed its ruling last month. Yes.
Philip, looking at the whole issue of corruption, and the EACC starts with ethics. If you look at an example of Bungoma, where they had 620-litre jerry cans for 10,000 shillings. I know this is recent, but looking at all of this, where does the issue of addressing ethics and processes come in? Because we have processes, yes, but it's breach of some of these processes then that lead to loss of public money, public assets.
I agree with you entirely, because we have the systems to try and keep the process transparent. But the people who violate those systems are like you and me. Okay, and we become clever and we find a way of maneuvering around those procurement procedures. So now, in terms of ethics, that comes down to values, because you can have any amount of laws. You could have institutions like EACC, DCI, asset recovery, but still, if it is not instilled within ourselves, people will still find ways of doing funny things like those jerry cans in Bungo. Yes.
But shouldn't that be somewhere top of the list? Because if you plug that particular tap or you close that tap, then what you're dealing with here downstream with trying to recover assets will be much less. Shouldn't we try and address that?
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's why at the very beginning I said that if you look at EACC's mandate, it's to prevent and combat corruption. There's an entire directorate dedicated to prevention, and you'll find all sorts of things, including education, training, public awareness. So these are things we are doing. We're not doing one thing and leaving the other. All these are prongs we are using to deal with corruption.
Would getting an public example work? I know some people have had drastic measures like line up all these people that are being alleged or thought to have stolen A, B, C, and D and do some, public flogging, something that would deter people. Should we get an example that will serve iwe funzo kwao na wengine kama wao?
I have to say there is that desire in many Kenyans, and many people we talk to tell us, why can't we take more drastic measures? But remember, we live in a country which we follow the law, they follow the rule of law, there is a constitution, the constitution protects individuals' rights, and that is why if we go back to the Amuti case, the whole process of writing to him first is to protect his rights. The whole process of taking him to court is also to give him a fair trial. So people have rights to own property, they have rights to a fair administrative action, and we try and balance we have coercive powers, but we need to balance that against the law.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are a number of cases that you're pursuing, Philip, in court. Some of them are in court, maybe some other are in investigation stages. But, just looking roughly at this kind of cases, for example, standard gauge land, the National Land Commission, several cases. Standard gauge land in Embakasi, compensation by Kenha in Mombasa, active investigations, 4 on SGR investigation, illegal allocation of land in Machakos, all of these cases. And looking, if we just take a look at the case that you just won, that's taken 16 years in court or so. I mean, when do we ever expect to see a conclusion of some of these cases?
What has happened in the recent past is that we have a dedicated division of the High Court to deal with anti-corruption matters.
Mm-hmm.
The former Chief Justice, Dr. William Mutunga, set up the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Division. That was in 2016.
Yep.
And it is no surprise that soon after that, the cases started being heard and concluded, mostly within less than 24 months. So whatever issues we had about older cases taking long, that is no longer the case with regard to the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Division specifically.
Yep.
The place where we still have a bit of a challenge is the Environment and Land Court. I think, Eric, if you have a plot somewhere and you're fighting with your neighbor and you try and take a date today, I think you'll be given a date in 2021.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that is a problem that is unique to that division. But in terms of the anti-corruption division, everything is now moving at an accelerated pace. So all those investigations and all those cases will be concluded within reasonable time.
Can I ask you, Philip, what, apart from the time that it takes, what else frustrates you as the EACC? What frustrates the process?
There are a number of things. For instance, if you're dealing with corrupt people and you know what they are like, you know they are corrupt anyway. And corruption fights back.
Yep.
So one of the major frustrations we've experienced is perhaps the documents disappearing or being destroyed. I think I saw a statistic of 4 county offices going up in flames.
Yes.
Yeah.
In about 1 year. Those are the kind of things where you know what has gone wrong. You were supposed to collect the documents by the time you get there, because we request the documents officially. The moment they realize something is afoot, they try and destroy the evidence.
Yep.
The other frustration, because I know maybe people don't realize this, but corruption is collusive in nature. It will be a deal between Eric and Du. So nobody is really complaining there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So EACC is coming from the outside. It's not like an assault case.
There's a complainant.
Eric saw somebody punch someone else in the bus, so they can be a witness. But this is a collusive case. These people are doing a deal.
Yes.
So those are the kind of frustrations that we have in getting those documents. Again, corruption investigations are complex in nature because remember, this money moves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And these corrupt people, they're smart. What we are doing most of the time is almost reactive because we are arriving after the fact.
Yep.
So imagine they've taken this money and it is moved through several accounts, it's been withdrawn in cash, it has bought assets in another person's name, all those sorts of things. So corruption investigations are very, very complex. So that's one of the challenging things, and that's why you might find an investigation took long before it goes to court.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's go to the phone lines, Philip. Barry is calling in, and I believe he has a question. Good morning, Barry.
Eric, how are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. First, I have 3 questions for Philip. But first, let me commend him for the good job they're doing at EACC. Then I think my first question to Philip, is there a threshold, and is there a threshold to trigger an EACC asset recovery process, and what are the steps that that take place to first of all identify a potential asset recovery case, and how do they pursue it? That's the first question. The second question is that as he has correctly said, corruption is multifaceted. For every corruption in the public sector, there is also a component in the private sector. So we see EACC getting so and doing a commendable job on public sector employees or servants, but we're not seeing an equal thing in the private sector. Yeah, so what are the follow-up mechanisms to follow up the entire corruption chain, both in the public and the private sector?
All right.
Then I think the third and the last question is, but I'm an accountant by profession, so probably some of these things we've experienced them more. Now, I can tell you for free, Eric, an accountant in a corruption chain is a mortician. Is in the tail end of the process.
Comes at the end.
He comes at the end of the process. Let me tell you, the real corruption, especially in public sector, takes place during budgeting. At the budgeting process, that's where deals are cut. That's where strategies are laid.
Yeah.
That's where everything happens. But we you realize that the budgeting does not happen in the same office where the accountant sits or the finance manager sits. It happens elsewhere. Now, is this fact known to EACC, and what are they doing about it?
All right. Good questions.
Those are my big questions, yes. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay.
Philip, good.
All right. So, in response to Barry, we don't necessarily have a threshold to trigger investigations for forfeiture of assets, but we do have a strategy. And the strategy is to deal with what we believe would be of greater impact to the people of Kenya. So the things that may contribute to the high impact cases include the value of the subject matter. So in this case, if you have a guy with 100 million, that will probably get higher priority than a 2 million case. And that's why all the cases I mentioned to you, I think only this Amuti one is below 50 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, the others are quite high. And how the information reaches that is two ways. One, we may get a complaint. Somebody may report and say, I know a public officer who is living way beyond his means. Okay, and this is where we require the public out there to join us in the fight and bring us the information. And the other side of it is we have intelligence-led investigations. So that's probably something that people are not aware of, but we have officers who are trained and highly capable, and they can sniff out these people.
So you've got people of Mushane out here in the estates looking at my lifestyle.
Intelligence.
Okay.
With regard to the private sector, right now the private sector corruption we are directly empowered to deal with is bribery. This is because of the Bribery Act of 2016. It says EACC can investigate private sector bribery. But with regard to the other forms of corruption, you will see that in the cases where we have succeeded, there are often private individuals involved. Because, for example, if you have somebody who has unexplained wealth, one of the things they tend to do is register property in the names of their spouses. Or their children, and they still take these people to court because you need an order saying that property has to come back. So the private sector is also affected in that sense.
How about in money laundering?
Exactly the same. There have been a couple of recent judgments, including some people who were found with ivory and so on and so forth. And the guy who was trading in the ivory had bought vehicles and registered them in his wife's name, and those vehicles were also declared proceeds of crime.
Okay.
Yeah, so notwithstanding that the ultimate person holding it is a private person, a private individual, it will still be forfeited.
Okay.
I noticed that Barry says he's an accountant, and he claims the accountant is only doing a post-mortem. But this is where we talk about individual responsibility, because at some point somebody will approve something, somebody will sign off on some expenditure, and that is what comes back to bite them. So they need to be careful, and I like to Barry, and if he's interested, next time we advertise for positions, he should join my team.
Voila, there's one out there.
So just to answer him, are you aware that the corruption starts at that budgeting stage? And do you have intelligence that is sniffing out the budgets of various organizations, public organizations?
Absolutely, and this is the reason why you see, when I talk about the investigation process takes long, and it is fairly complex. by the time you see some of these high-profile cases being brought to court, it means the investigation has been very extensive. These people have gone and found out where the source, the genesis of the problem was, and that is why these people have ended up with pockets full of cash. Yes.
Philip, in the line of getting information, as you say, you have intelligence out there, and Eric says people of Mushane. There is an option to report anonymously or via phone, either SMS or email. Are these secured? Because even if it's anonymous, it's through the EACC portal, or rather, you have to log in through somewhere. Your URL or your, what's it called, the IP address will be indicated somewhere, so it can really be traced back to you. So for people who want to report anonymously, how anonymous is this anonymous, so that people are more willing to come out and say, I think Eric is living beyond his means?
Okay, I get that concern because sometimes somebody actually walks into the office and says, I want to report, but I don't want my name recorded.
Yeah.
So that is one kind of anonymous. But there's the way in which you log into the EACC portal, and you do not need to leave any details other than that this is the complaint. This is the issue that you have observed. And that is secure. And remember, we really try and take care of the people who will ultimately be our witnesses. There's a witness protection agency which will deal with that. And under the Bribery Act, we also have what we call whistleblower protection. So basically, a person who is a whistleblower should not be victimized for that. So the system is safe. It is foolproof. People should be able to make those reports without fear of reprisal.
There are instances where we have heard complaints, EACC investigations taking long, and finally, when it comes to prosecution, that's when somebody is actually hearing that they've been under investigation. And maybe at some point, people come and say, well, they were investigating Ndu, who's my partner, but I did not even know that Ndu had any corrupt dealings. And I've also been enjoined in this particular case. But somebody is taken to court. Their record shows that they have been taken to court by the EACC. And at some point, they're wondering, so how do I clear my name out of this?
What I can say about that, Eric, is that is simply not true. Because remember, we operate, as I said, within the rule of law. And one of those fundamental principles is giving this person a fair chance to explain himself. So there is nobody who gets to court without having been invited to EACC for an interview, without being given an opportunity to record a statement, to clarify his position. No one. It does not happen. In any event, have you ever heard of a case where there is no statement? Cases don't proceed if there are no statements. I think this is well known. Yes. So there is nobody who ends up in court without going through every stage of the process.
Philip Kagucia, we want to thank you very much for joining us this morning. And just like Barry and many others have said, congratulations, and keep up the good work at the EACC. Keep fighting the difficult fight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric, and Ndu for having us.
Thank you very much,
we will
Philip.
continue holding the flame.
But listen, we want the big fish. We want blood on the streets.
Okay.
It's all talk and talk and talk, and we want blood on the streets.
Eric is not shy about his position.
Yeah, I know he has people lined up in Uhuru Park.
Yes.
No. We are a professional institution and we will follow the law.
Asante sana, Philip. Have a good day.
All right.